Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
I was reading on the Catholic calendar that this is basically called the ordinary season.
Correct.
Okay, explain the ordinary season to me.
The liturgical calendar, which is really the church calendar, is made up like life itself. Life goes on a day-to-day basis, but then there are certain times when there are periods of joy and celebration, and so you go into that type of a mode. But then once that's over with, you're back to the everyday situation for a while. Then maybe something else happens, and you have another big celebration, another big event, and maybe it's a national feast day or whatever. So what I'm trying to say is that the church calendar is made up very similarly to the life of the ordinary person. So ordinary means that we go into the regular cycle of the church calendar. There are 3 different cycles that we follow. Right now we happen to be in year B. See, what the church tries to do is to make sure that the general public gets to hear most of the Bible. And so they divide the Bible into 3 sections. They call it A, B, and C. And so year B, which started right on the first Sunday of Advent as we prepare for Christmas, and it goes right through the year 2018 until next November when we start year C. So they concentrate on different evangelists, okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of course, but they intersperse. It's not exactly all one for the whole liturgical year, but it concentrates. You'll hear a lot about Matthew, okay? He's the one that we're concentrating on presently, but it doesn't have to always be Matthew's gospel. So the church has it pretty well arranged. Now, ordinary is ordinary, but when you consider what happens on that altar, when Jesus makes himself so accessible to you and me that he uses those ordinary means of sustenance, bread and wine, which for the general public in the world meant the food and the drink that the ordinary person would have. Well, he becomes that way whenever we celebrate the Eucharist. So ordinary has different meanings, okay, is what I'm trying to get at. Ordinary of a diocese means the bishop. He is the ordinary of the diocese, which means he has full power. If he's the ordinary, he has full power over that diocese. To distinguish ordinary from auxiliary bishop, the auxiliary bishop is a bishop who resides in a particular diocese, but who is not the ordinary. For example, in our case, it will be Archbishop Vigneron. He is the ordinary of the diocese, the Archdiocese of Detroit.
Ordinary sounds incredibly simplistic.
Yeah.
Take me through that just for a second, because the Archbishop, the head of our diocese, is the ordinary.
Yes.
It seems like a strange moniker for the Archbishop to have as not only Archbishop, but
he's the ordinary.
He's the ordinary.
See, there are only certain decisions that only he can do.
Does the ordinary suggest that he blends in with all of us?
No.
No?
Well, let me put it this way. I'm not an expert.
Okay.
I don't claim to be, but I don't think that's the main reason, okay? The main reason is that the word ordinary means he's the one who functions as the head of the diocese on a regular basis. And when I say the head of the diocese, I capitalize the word head, okay? Because there are other bishops in our diocese, as you well know. And so these other bishops, we call them auxiliary bishops. They're bishops who help out the ordinary, who is the main bishop. So for now, unless I do more research, That will be the explanation that
Okay.
I will give you.
Well, I think he did a very, very, very good job. So continue. We are into the Section B season of Ordinary.
Right.
And the Mass right now is basically relying on
Matthew, Mark, Luke,
and John. I get nervous sometimes in front of Father
So do
Grimaldi.
It's just as an aside, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Right.
Almost gives you the idea that Matthew was the first writer. He was not. And it was Mark who was the first writer. And Mark wrote such a simplistic gospel. You can sit down and read it in a few minutes, the whole gospel. Whereas Matthew, who primarily preached to the Jewish Christians, those who were now becoming Christians, if you want, he took Mark's gospel and expanded on it and put in a lot more Jewish symbolism so that the Jewish Christians would be able to assimilate what they heard into what they were used to. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. Yeah. When we get back to this being the ordinary season,
yes,
your rigors as a priest basically relies more, not so much on the events surrounding the time, but rather just our faith.
Our faith, and also the idea that maybe we should give more emphasis on what takes place on that altar on a daily basis when Jesus becomes so vulnerable because he wants to make himself accessible to the ordinary individual, that he comes to us in the form of bread and wine. And so, to me, that's a very powerful, it certainly takes faith. You can't have somebody come in there and say, well, yeah, I believe that. No, it takes faith to believe that that piece of bread changes. Transubstantiation is the word. Changes, and it becomes something else.
Jesus, during the ordinary season, if you will, what was he doing? We've just come off of Advent, Christmas. Now we're into the ordinary season. What was he doing during this time?
You know, I don't think he was doing anything different than he did before or after.
He was preaching. He
was
out
preaching. He was also healing. He was helping people whenever he could. You see, what Jesus did, basically, he wants you and me to do, is to make the kingdom visible to the ordinary folks. Now, you say, well, only Jesus could do that. Yes, to an extent, that's true, but by the same token, you and I have it within our power to make good things happen on a small basis every day, whether it be going to the hospital and smiling at an individual and making that person laugh and giving that person new hope and so on and so forth. I think we have it within our power to do healing as well. Basically, the idea of healing, we attribute healing to Jesus and miracle workers and so on and so forth. But healing, the ordinary person could do in his or her own way by bringing some strength and bringing some hope to those people who are down and out. I always make sure, particularly during holiday seasons, to pray for and have the people pray for those who suffer depression. Depression is at its height during festive times. And I think it's your job and my job to be aware of those people that we know that suffer from depression and maybe be more attentive to their needs. And then to pray in general for all of those who suffer. But anyway, the idea of ordinary time, the way I tried to do this at the beginning, explain at the beginning, I don't think it still holds true, is that the liturgical calendar is really built in the same way that life itself is built. There are times that we have high points, times when we have low points, and then there are times where life goes on every day. We report for work, or we do this, that, or the other thing, and life goes on. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.